Hi everyone, good afternoon. Thank you so much for coming to the Evanston History Center. My name is Krista. I am the Director of Public Engagement here at the Evanston History Center, which is based here in the historic landmark Charles Dawes home. This was the home of Charles Dawes for many decades and his family. He was Vice President of the United States exactly 100 years ago under Calvin Coolidge. He won a Nobel Peace Prize. He had a top 10 musical hit and lots of other interesting things. If you haven't been here before and you'd like to get more information, we do house tours Thursdays through Sundays. Some of you might have met our wonderful docent Kathy, who leads those tours. It's a full 45-minute tour where you can find out all of the architectural and historic details of this home. We also recognize that as the Evanston History Center, we are very privileged to be in this home, this lakefront property. This is the unceded ancestral lands of the Potawatomi, the Ojibwe, and the Odawa peoples. We remember that as we do this work. We are committed to being a history center for all of Evanston, and as part of that, catching up for the years when organizations such as ours, and including ours, didn't really do a great job of telling everybody's stories in terms of whose stories are remembered and preserved or erased throughout history. So we're really proud to be a history center for all of Evanston, have a place and a space to document and share lots of different stories. I just a question, because I love partnering with other organizations, with Joanne and with Hive Book Arts. Who here is a Evanston History Center member? A couple, okay. Who here is it the first time at the Dawes House? Okay. Who's a friend of Joanne's? Who is a friend of Hive Book Arts? Okay. Who grew up in Evanston in some part of their life, like Joanne? Okay. Who is part of the coolest book club in Evanston? That's my book club. Support Evanston Independent Bookstore, something like that. They're on Facebook, but you're welcome to join them because it's a great book club. So I'm totally digressing, but this event is part of a kind of loose series that we're working with here at the History Center called Home Evanston. It's a framework for us to explore both homes like this and other architectural homes, but also on a deeper level what it means to make a home and find a home, a sense of belonging here in Evanston throughout history and today. So we have lots of different programs. We have a event coming up on April 30th, which is a poetry reading with Rhino Poetry, which is a poetry house based here in Evanston. We'll have 7 of their featured poets reading here. I don't know if it's the first time we've done a poetry reading at the Dawes House, but it's the first time in a while. We have our annual house walk, which is on Mother's Day, May 10th. That, unlike most of our programs, is not a free event, but tickets can be purchased and you get to go into 6 or 7 historic homes. Couldn't help it. Historic homes in Evanston and learn about the history and the architecture. So welcome, thank you for being here. There's restrooms around the corners to the left, restroom, no S, so be patient with that. We have some refreshments. If you didn't have a chance, there's an exhibit that's only open for another week or two called Unveiling Evanston Women, the small exhibit upstairs, right over there. I want to thank our lovely pianist, Jane Driscoll. She is here on Thursdays and Saturdays from 1 to 4 for our house tour, but she volunteered to stay to provide the entree music for this evening, which was really nice. Anyway, okay, so now I'm so excited to do this event with Evanston author Joanne Jacobson. I'm just going to read the bio because I want to make sure that those of you who don't know her, know a lot about her. After nearly 50 years in Iowa, France, Vermont, and New York City, and deep into the global pandemic, Joanne Jacobson returned to Southeast Evanston, the neighborhood where she grew up. Jacobson has published 3 memoirs set in Evanston: Hunger Artist, A Suburban Childhood, Every Last Breath, a memoir of 2 illnesses, and In the Photic Zone, which is her newest book. And all of those books are up front and available for sale afterwards. Joanne has taught courses in American literature and culture, and nonfiction writing at the University of Iowa, the University of Angers, Middlebury College, and Yeshiva University. Since retiring and returning home in 2021, she has taught courses on writing about the body in the medical humanities programs at Northwestern and the University of Illinois Chicago. Thank you for being here, Joanne. We're so happy. And then this is in conversation with Anne Hudson. Anne is the author of 3 poetry collections, most recently, Subtraction Isn't Always Less. She has received residencies from the Virginia Center for the Creative Arts and the Midwest Writing Center, and was a finalist for the Dorothy Sargent Rosenberg Poetry Prize. Anne is a senior editor for poetry journal Rhino, that I mentioned, April 30th, come back, and is a teaching artist and director of education for the Hive Center for the Book Arts in Evanston, Illinois. If you haven't been there, it's on Custer Street. It's really cool. I'm sure Anne can tell you more about it afterwards. I was going to say something while I was doing that, but I don't remember, so I think we're just going to kick it off. There'll be time for questions and answers afterwards, and we're going to see how it works with the mic, passing it between the two of them. We might go off mic, and if you can't hear us, let us know, and we'll make sure we use the mic. So thank you all for being here, and I'm going to pass it to Anne, right?
Thank you so much, Krista. I'm just really enjoying being here. I mean, this seems like a dream come true to have an event in this special space, being stared down by an animal. And Joanne, I'm so excited about this book. Congratulations on the publication of In the Photic Zone. It's a fantastic collection. I can't wait for you all to enjoy it. I want to know, what is a photic zone? Can you tell us more about that? And I also know, I have some inside information. I know that you are a very accomplished photographer, and I'm guessing photic and photographer have similar etymological roots here. I'm starting right off on the nerd train, just starting right there. But so I would like to know sort of what a photic zone is, and maybe what its significance is to photography and observation and ways of seeing.
So, thank you. I can tell you what a photic zone is. That's good, huh? The photic zone is the layer of water, the layer at the top of bodies of water, below which photosynthesis doesn't take place. So really I used it as a way to think about the bottommost layer of life. And just learned that pretty recently, and when I learned it, I thought, I think I can use that. I have no idea its connection to photography, but for sure the prefixes, I'm sure someone here knows better Latin than I do, but I'm sure it's connected. Did you want to say something else, Anne?
Oh, I have more questions for you.
That we'll do at the start? Okay, sure.
Oh, yeah. So I would love to know, you've lived in so many different places in your life so far. You've lived in Vermont, you lived in France, you've lived obviously in New York, Iowa. Why come back? What draws you back to Evanston?
So I guess I could say that we had to flee each of those places, but that's not completely true. So what brought us back? We came back, Ellen and I, my wife Ellen and I, during really a year into the pandemic. And we had been living in New York. We were the only one of our close friends who weren't from New York. And really all of our friends had family and roots deeper than ours in New York. And we felt like we were stuck in a place where we couldn't really be with any people. We could be outside with people. We had both just retired, and we loved the idea of going back to a place where we had family who would be in our pod. So that's really why we came back. And I think also we were kind of at a point in our lives where we thought, if we're gonna do something different, now's the time. And that was the right decision. That really was so right. I knew it would be, but Ellen isn't from this area, so she took a chance on my behalf. Yeah, that's why, and I think it's been really great. I've missed New York in some ways, but this has been a good place to be, really great place to be, a writer.
So Evanston was home to you, and then it wasn't home, and now it's home again. How has your idea of Evanston as home changed since you've gone away and come back? One of my favorite poets, Elizabeth Bishop, says in one of her famous poems, Question of Travel, which it's in a collection that she wrote right after she moved to Brazil from the United States, and she had moved there to live permanently. So she was really thinking about, you know, what is home and what does it mean to be, you know, in an unfamiliar space and making home of it. What does it mean to miss home, have a kind of nostalgia for home? You have literally lived in Evanston, left and come back, but it's not the same Evanston, I'm sure, than, you know, than the one that you grew up in. How has it been altered?
So it's definitely different. I mean, I would never have in a million years predicted that I was going to move when I was 70 back to 3 or 4 blocks from the place that I grew up. Do you think that's a failure of imagination? And actually, we didn't see the apartment in advance. We just did everything online. But how is it different? I think personally that Evanston is a much more interesting place now. And I can give one example, which is that when my family moved to our block on Michigan between Keeney and Kedzie, I think we were the first Jewish family on the block, and there was a club of women who met regularly, and they had a rule that no Jews could be part of that club. So my mother's first friends were all the women on the block who left that club, and they were so great. And meanwhile, you know, I guess I miss some of the old stores, and some of which, I mean, it's funny, I live in an apartment, I can look out the window and see a number of the stores, or where the stores used to be, that I stole from when I was a teenager.
When did you leave Evanston?
Oh, I left actually to go to graduate school in 1973. And my mom lived here. My mom worked for the city of Evanston, and she lived here till she died, really. I mean, not really. She lived here till she died. So it's definitely become, I think, you know, there were no restaurants here. This was when Evanston was dry. But definitely not in the southeast Evanston. So I think it's a much more, you know, sympathetic place for us to be living than it would have been then. I'm not sure I would have come back. I think Evanston is, you know, and I wouldn't say just more congenial. I would describe it as a very congenial place for us. I feel like we really can belong here. You know, love New York as well.
Well, now that we've teed you up, would you mind reading?
Sure.
We're doing this in a slightly unusual way, in that I'm going to give Joanne a chance to read a few sections from each of her 3 books, and then I'm going to bust in with some more questions, and then she'll read from her books again, and I'll bust in with a few more questions. That gives you plenty of time to come up with questions of your own, should you have them, and then we'll be able to have Joanne sign books at the very end.
And there'll be time for a Q&A, but if it fits better as we go along, that's also completely fine. So we've organized the readings around 2 themes. One is my mother and her gardens, and that's the first ones that I'm going to read from. I'm going to read from something fairly short from each of the memoirs, Hunger Artist, which I'm going to read from when my family first moved to Evanston in 1957, Every Last Breath, which puts into dialogue with one another my mother's COPD and my blood clotting disorder. It really thinks about what it means to be chronically ill. And then the last one, which I'm thrilled to say, this is the this is the first reading from it. This is the launch here, and so I'm really grateful to Anne and also to Krista for making this opportunity for me. So, as Anne said, I'm going to read something from each of the memoirs, and then I'll stop and I'll take my chances with Anne, and then the second set of readings is about, each one deals with a different Evanston landmark. And so what I'm hoping is that we can do some thinking about memory and about how memory changes, how memory and remembering change over time, and writing about memory change over time. In addition, I hope to sort of push some buttons for people who remember some of these places, maybe even remember my mom. I'm always surprised that this, of course, never happened to me in New York, that I meet people who knew my mom, which is pretty great. So the first one I'm going to read from is the very beginning of Hunger Artist. Can everyone hear me, by the way? Okay, super. And this is my family's arrival in Evanston in the summer of 1957. In the sweet, lucky June when I was nearly 6, my parents turned from the city where they had been children and lovers, and where their own parents had loved them, and hoped for a new beginning. The long years of war and of holding back were behind them. Up Chicago's suburban lakeshore, they found a big house on a block carpeted with spring green lawns and lined with spreading trees. Each time we landed at the front curb in our Studebaker Lark, plain and tan and cumbersome, a relic of the strained years on my father's salary as a medical resident that were now ending, we crossed over to a fresh territory. The entire world seemed to lie molten around us, amenable to our presence, inviting us to leave our mark. With gleaming new tools, pronged trowels, hoes, rakes, we opened the earth in our yard, uprooted weeds, collected fallen leaves from the autumn and the spring that had passed just before we arrived, and deposited them in a pile near the garage, where they yielded luxurious mulch. My parents were intoxicated by seed catalogs, by their lavish foretelling of possibility. Roses, just pink roses, came in countless varieties, it seemed. My mother and father turned the glossy pages at the kitchen table and breathlessly ripped open their deliveries of seeds and the peat starter sets that would dissolve into the soil as soon as the young plants took root. And the seasons began to move, it seemed, to the rhythm of growing and blooming that my own mother set. During our first autumn in the house, she sank bulbs at the yellowing border between the grass and her rock garden. In the spring, she surrounded the house with a velvety layer of ground cover. In winter, she kept a shovel on the front steps, and she drove a straight, certain path through every snowfall, clearing our way to the curb. Through the deepest white, cold, and wet, we would make our daily way in her wake to this new world. Now from Every Last Breath. This is one of my mother's last gardens, quite a while after we left that house, the house they first lived in on Michigan in southeast Evanston. I silently enter my mother's garden before she wakes. Alone here for the first time, I'm astonished by what she's brought to life in this place. Along the stone walk, rows of begonias, elegant linen blossoms, are at their peak, set against the muscular darkness of waxy ground cover. In a large square at the center of the garden, a bold white border of impatiens surrounds delicate green ferns, and shiny leaves of hosta circle a high pot, spilling blue bachelor's buttons. Where was I when my mother was calculating for all this? When she was setting down the 3 ceramic frogs, half hidden in the thick of leaves, during the blooming months. An invisible hand suddenly surprises my heart here, reaching for blood, pressing on muscle. My grandparents came to America from the small Jewish villages of Eastern Europe, from dark, gardenless places. In 50 years of seasons lived in this town, my mother has never bought a house without a garden. Every one of them made hers by planting and tending. This last one, which is from In the Photic Zone, my mother's last garden. She lived at the Mather for the last seven or so years of her life, and the Mather had a spectacular, I don't know if it's their innovation where the gardens were raised, so if you couldn't bend over, you could still garden, and that was fantastic for my mom. I remember my mother in her gardens, the delicate light blue bachelor's buttons that she planted with my father, the little house that she bought after my parents' divorce, where a rickety fence sagged between the rows of marigolds that she patiently put in, and the ruckus of the supermarket parking lot next door. At the raised plot at the retirement home where she could work near the end of her life without stooping, she'd lift a hand as we pushed her wheelchair through the gardens, calling for a stop so she could name the flowers that she saw, daffodils and tulips, the milkweed that her friends planted to attract monarch butterflies. "Damn you, rabbit," she cried, waving her arms when a bunny hopped brazenly from her own plot. And even when she could no longer manage the work of gardening, my mother remained on the lookout for what gardens gave her. "Somebody had a great day putting those in," she called out from the back seat of the car, where we thought she had dozed off as we drove past a lush patch of lilies along a busy road.
So I noticed that your description of your mother's gardens they are lush and detailed and full of color and sound. Is that what your mother was like? Was she a contrast to those wonderful, intoxicating landscapes that she curated?
I think it was what my mother was like around gardens. I think my mother was brought to life by them. And I have to admit, I was a resident at Ragdale up in Lake Forest several times. Each of the libraries in the North Shore system has a specialty area, and the specialty area at Lake Forest Library was gardening. Because personally, I had no idea what flowers grew at what time of year, and it was kind of important that I get that straight. But yeah, I think both of my parents were very serious gardeners. But I think for my mom, that was always the way she planted roots in a place, and I just think that was where she was most colorful. I mean, she was a very optimistic person, and I think that gardening is a very optimistic act, and I think that's one of the great truths of the Mather Gardens, is that planting something that has a future. It's not going to end at the end of this season. I think that is really one of the great kinds of wisdom of those gardens at the Mather, to always have something to expect from the next season.
So you partially answered this, but I want to lean into this a little bit more. So gardens are often images that signify potential and renewal and regrowth and transformation and generosity, beauty. But I noticed that in some of the passages that you read and others that you didn't, that gardens are also a way of anchoring, of taking root, and of bonding to a place. And I'm wondering why rootedness might have been important to your family. If there was a sense of uprootedness that informed some of that desire to bond.
think that's a great question and a really important aspect of their move to Evanston. I see my cousin who grew up in South Shore, which is where my parents both grew up, and I think my parents really wanted to leave a place. I've just complained about the fact that they were the only Jews on the block, but I actually think they were eager to come to a place that felt to them more connected to the American present, and I think that was a big part of their move here. So I think that really, I've lost my track. What was the last part of that question, Anne?
Just why rootedness might
Oh,
be part of
yes.
important to your family.
Yeah, and I think that, they bought this house on Michigan. They both had grown up in neighborhoods that were basically brick bungalows, probably out of my price range currently, but they were smaller. They were than where we lived, and my other cousins lived also in pretty modest but nice brick bungalows, and I think that was a big deal. My father was a doctor, his residency was ending. I think it was very important to him to live in a house that was more grand than the house that he grew up in, even though I remember one of my friends from grammar school who lived in another part of Southeast Evanston, asking me how we could live in a house that was so small. So this neighborhood maybe reminds you that Evanston is very much a layered city. And I think that was really, really important to them, especially to my father. My mother's family, the siblings of her generation, had grown up in a Yiddish-speaking household. They went to grammar school on the south side. They didn't know any English when they went, and they continued to speak Yiddish at home. My father felt very strongly that he never wanted to hear Yiddish spoken in our house. This was about marking a difference in their Americanness. And I do think having this very ambitious garden, I think that was part of it also. This was definitely a start over for them both. And I think that gardening was very much part of that. I mean, I think it was also a moment in American gardening, when there were all of these innovations like, different kinds of seeds, the beginning of having hoses, the technology of gardening was changing. Burpee had all of these new seeds, and they were just, as I mentioned, they were just on board with it. Every year that McCormick Center had a huge flower show, and we always went to that. And my parents, I think, went to every part of it. So that was very different from the life that they had come from, and I think that was one of the ways they marked it.
All right, I have one more gardening question for you before we hit up some landmarks. But can you speak for a moment about how naming and attention and observation, sort of using language with precision like a scientist, and lyricism and beauty and sort of big sweeping statements, that is using language to create something wonderful or full of wonder, how they operate together in your work? How are you precise like a scientist and then full of awe like someone with a lyric imagination? How do you do that?
A poet. Well,
I was avoiding that word.
it's very I was trained as an academic, and I have a book that came before these books that was an academic book about turn of the 20th century American autobiography. And I think within sort of nanoseconds of my getting tenure with that book, I just stopped doing that kind of writing. But it was really hard to learn this other kind. I think the first essay I wrote, which was about my father and books, my father was really important. Books were really important to him, and I think also part of his break from his parents, who were not readers. And So I think for me, it took me a long time to be able to write in the first person. And each draft that I did, I would show to various people I knew, and they would say, this is interesting, it's nice, it's good, but you really need to be able to write about yourself more. Whereas it seemed to me I was completely naked. I do think that one of the influences on me in the rhythms of my writing is music, playing music as a kid. I was a not terribly serious pianist, but for many years, and I played in the orchestra. There was a all-city orchestra here in Evanston then, and I think that experience of rhythm really is at the heart of my prose style. And I think that's what took me a long time to recognize that, but I think that was really what taught me to write with that kind of a rhythm. But it was really hard at the beginning not to feel as though I was, after all of these years of kind of learning to write as an academic, never speaking in the first person, how hard it was to break from that and to also give up, to take a foray into a voice that was new for me and that was risky. I mean, these topics are risky, and I think it's also risky to write in a voice that you're not used to. Like I was 40 when I started writing these, and I think that felt really, it felt really new. I had that same fellowship at Ragdale, and I went back there a few times. It's a wonderful place. I marked a place for me, I think, for the first time, being somewhere with other writers and artists, that I thought of myself as a writer, not as a critic. And I don't think those things are really completely different, but it really was it was a step I had to take.
I'm just going to hold the microphone for a minute while you juggle your books.
Boy,
And
any idea what I
Take
did?
a
That's what I did with
sip
my
of
water,
water,
yes. Perfect.
and we would love to hear about some landmarks of Evanston that you recall that were significant for you in your childhood and or beyond.
Okay. Thanks, Anne. Those are great. It's so great for me to be able to think about these things, to have these questions draw me out. So great for me. As before, I'm going to read from all three books. I think most people here will probably recognize some of these. They seem to me landmarks. The first one is not there anymore. The other two are in different ways. So the first of these is what used to be the B&G Diner on Main Street, on the south side of Main Street, just west of Hinman. Or is that the north side?
North side.
Thank you. It's now Paragon Thai Restaurant. No, it's good that you corrected me because I'm going to say the opposite for the next one. So this is an essay called Cheeseburger, and I'm going to read most of it. I love to eat at the B&G, the diner on Evanston's Main Street, 2 blocks up from Lincoln School. That's where I was about to say as an undergraduate. When our grandparents visit, my sister and I count on walking over with them on the Saturday afternoon. Our treat, my grandmother offers brightly, waving an expansive hand toward my grandfather on the couch in front of the TV, and then back toward her own bosom. I follow my grandparents down the sidewalk, counting the left and right turns that lead us to where we are going. I might go through the motions of accepting a menu from the aproned waitress, propping the cushioned folio on the Formica tabletop, and turning the heavy laminated pages. But this is just a gesture, as ritualistic as the moment when I set the closed volume at my place, and as inevitable as my order. A cheeseburger and French fries with a cherry Coke. Planted at the center of my toasted sesame bun when it arrives will be a toothpick wrapped in a twist of colored cellophane, flying a miniature red, white, and blue American flag. On the thin patty inside, 2 wavy slices of dill pickle will, I know, be sitting in a thin layer of mustard and ketchup. The fries will be heaped up on one side of the plate, and a shallow, pleated paper cup loaded with a single serving of coleslaw will be set near the opposite edge. I hold the crusted lip of the ketchup bottle over the plate and tap the upended bottom until thick liquid starts down in a rush, leaving a cold, sweet puddle into which I dip the almost too hot, salty fried potatoes, one by one. I let my tongue and my teeth find the greasy meat inside, the soft bread, the crunch and tang of the condiments. I can feel the pillowy plastic of the booth's long seat settling into sticky place around my thighs. When I climb down, I drop to the black and white checked linoleum with a little thump. Above me, things are already in motion, coming to a conclusion. The waitress bending down to deliver mints to my sister and me, my grandfather handing the paper slip of our check with a couple of folded bills over the glass counter, high over our heads, to the cashier, the cash register ringing, the metal drawer sliding open and banging shut. The plate glass door gives us a breathy push onto the sidewalk, and the curtain comes down behind us. So now I can say with confidence that this next piece is from the south side of Main Street. Hold on one sec here. Here we go. What used to be the Evanshire Pharmacy and is now the Brothers K Cafe, I guess, coffee bar, on the other side of Main Street. I am drinking a cappuccino in what used to be the neighborhood drugstore of my childhood, converted now into a coffee bar. From this table and chair, I can reconstruct the old geography. The shelves near the front door, loaded with candy and gum, and the cashier behind them, the sound of her register taking in nickels and dimes, ringing over and over. The big freezer chest filled with popsicles and ice cream sandwiches and pint containers of rainbow sherbet, puffing cold steam each time someone lifted the heavy lid. In memory, this place holds still, a suspension of glass cases on which glossy yellow and black boxes of Jean Naté lotion and bath salts and atomizers do these still exist? Yes. Were buoyed like the sailboats on Lake Michigan, just a few blocks away. I would stand transfixed in the slice of afternoon left at the end of the school day, watching trays of roasted salted nuts turn like a Ferris wheel, their light, breathy scent meeting midair, the thickly sweet smell of the perfume. The same black and white tile still spreads over the floor, nicked and warped now in many spots, but still the same ground on which I stood in hungry wonder more than a half century ago. Around me, people I don't know read newspapers, order coffee, catch up with one another over breakfast. What do these people see when they see me? A fattish, white-haired woman in jeans and black boots, her table and her sweater littered with crumbs from the pastry she ordered with her coffee. I'm still breathing, my heart pumping, my blood filling with oxygen, as it used to here so many years ago. And then, finally, this is from the last essay in the photic zone. This takes place at what was and still is Lee Street Beach, the neighborhood I grew up in. It's actually the title essay, In the Photic Zone. The perimeters of my early years, a half dozen streets unfolding in 3 directions, and then the 4th, work of the final glaciers, Lake Michigan and its beaches. In summer, I floated on the great water, shiver cold until September, stretched nearly to the Canadian border, where it reaches its most deeper than life, below the photic zone that marks the limits of photosynthesis. When I emerged on my knees, the lake releasing my body from the shallows, I could see hundreds of towels and umbrellas opened across the beach to the warming sun. Breaking the sand's crust with our shovels, my sister and I easily reached the water table, carving moats around our castles or moistening the drying walls before they crumbled. At some point during the afternoon, we would join the restless wait for ice cream. Our mother knew from the changing angle of the sun exactly when it was time to shake off the clinging sand and get dressed again for the short walk home. After dinner, when the summer light stretched on, we might head back into the streets on our bikes with friends, ringing the bells at the end of our handlebars, circling our territory over and over. Soon we would hear our parents' voices reach out for us, and we would turn back. Today, a single gull beats the air above the shore, skims the water's surface, then rises against the pastel sky. Suddenly, Canada geese appear overhead, honking, moving in to scout for food. I can feel the sound they make echoing in my own body. So aware am I, in this, my 70th year, not only of the markers of the changing seasons, but equally of my own season turning. Few living things signal the cyclical shape of life in a more stately way than geese in V formation in the high sky, their wings spread wide, coasting, working the air. Yet these birds are not headed further south, I know. They no longer follow the ancient flyways to winter along the warm Atlantic coast, as distant as Miami. Here in the city, where predator populations have declined, they've learned to forage in the grass and the garbage of public parks and to find warm spots to sleep on rooftops of houses and factory buildings, conserving energy to shorten their return flight north in spring. Their droppings splatter in parks, and they waddle on land, awkward big birds like any others. The beach is diminished now as well, eroded by the lake's steady rise over the past decade, and my mother has been gone for nearly 5 years. Many miles north along the shoreline, the water has engulfed entire houses, unexpectedly buried what humans built and lived in. And even here, where what's left remains sufficient to accommodate running dogs and a lifeguard stand and several rows of beach umbrellas, the crescent of sand narrowing toward a wall of raw boulders feels like loss. No one knows if the lake is just making gentle adjustments, or if it is returning to prehistoric levels, if it could once again cover the surrounding land. Returning to this place, turning toward the end of my own short history, I walk the sand's damp edge, where my mother and my aunt brought my sister and my cousins and me half a century ago, undressing our still young bodies, the bodies of their children, spreading beach towels, and unpacking picnic lunches, unafraid of the sun.
Anne. Oh.
Thank you. So I am really curious about how time operates in conjunction with geography. So you've mentioned these landmarks, a diner, a pharmacy, and a beach, which are at least in part significant because of the people that you have been there with. But we also have the way that the time is working in terms of a single lifetime, generational time, geologic time. What does standing in a place and remembering or projecting back and into the future in time due to your sense of that place?
So I've never actually tried to put all three of these memoirs together like this. And so that I'm very aware this was a good exercise for me as well. And obviously one thing is to be thinking about who I was when I was young and who I am now, which I can't pretend is anything but farther from then than I thought I would be. So I think that, one of these places is gone, the diner. One of these places has been transformed into one of the great markers of the culture we live in, the coffee bar. And the other, the beach, I think we all know is kind of in a way, it's a kind of shadowy and dark reminder that the beach changes every year, that the size of Lee Street Beach, for example, it's just tiny compared to when I was growing up. And of course, these were, the water at one point went all the way up to Ridge. So I think for me, it's very hard not to be conscious in a way that I don't think I've ever written about before, that my time is not unlimited. Maybe everybody else knows that, it's obvious, but in my heart, I think this has had, I've watched my mom in these, these last gardens be within a year or two of her passing away. I hope I'm not within a year or two of passing away, but who knows? I mean, one of these books is about being very sick, and I think one thing I learned from that is no one knows what their time is. And I think, that all has a very cliched ring to it. But it's, I think it's a really hard thing to grasp. And so I think that for me, seeing the passage of not just of time, but of these three books, which are written over the course of more than 20 years, has been really a turning back into that awareness of living, of time being something that's not unlimited, of time that's being marked. And I think in a way that's just a very powerful thing. But I think it's not without its emotion, that is for sure. And I think I actually think about it as I read that last section, that's probably by far the most emotional prose that I read aloud today. To think about coming to Lee Street Beach and being aware of that.
All right, I have one more question before I turn you loose on, turn Joanne loose on you. I don't know what the preposition should be there, but y'all sort it out. So in writing about home, which is also writing about family, which is also writing about the self and relationship and all of that, how do you make decisions about what to say and what not to say, what stories to withhold and which stories to present? And I guess put in another way, when writing memoir or something adjacent to memoir, sort of a lyric essay, is everything in these books absolutely true?
It's how I remember things, and occasionally I've moved people in and out because there's just too many characters, and that would be it wouldn't be possible to follow. In all three of these cases, I did not start out to write a book. I started writing, in the second case, I started writing these little essays about my mother as she was changing, and I started to think, especially as I was diagnosed with a serious illness, that putting those in dialogue with one another. And the first one, actually, Hunger Artist, I had these essays, and an agent said to me, well, you need to put these in chronological order, and I spent like a year and a half doing that. And then they lost most of their emotional energy doing that. So then I went back, and I changed them back. And that was partly, my learning that, and I think that for a little while I thought, oh my God, all that time that I spent with this, but I think I would never have known to trust myself if I hadn't gone through that. I thought you were actually going to ask a different question, which I'll meld into this. Some questions have to do with, what right do I have to write about these things? So there's one scene that I didn't read from here that took place in my grandparents' house in South Shore, where my mom and her twin sister were basically sexually molested by a cousin who had just moved from Europe. And Ellen said to me, that's not your story. That was like the first time I'd really confronted that question. So I went, she said, you gotta ask your mom if she can give you permission to take that story. So I did, and my mother paused. And she made it pretty clear she'd rather I didn't use it, but she said, if this is gonna make your book better, she said, give me 24 hours. And then she said, if this is gonna make your book better, I give it to you. But she said, don't tell my sister that it's us. Take her out of the story. So I just erased her. It became just my mother. And I guess that's a good example of something that's partly true. And I'm really grateful that my mother gave me that permission. Later she said, if I had told you you couldn't use it, would you have not used it? I said I would have not used it, but I would have been really disappointed. I think that these questions about what goes into writing about your past, these are not just what you heard today, and I had to struggle with this a bit in making the presentation. I think makes it clear that none of these books moves in a linear progression from start to finish. And I think that breaking with that linearity is one of the great privileges of modern writing in a way, that I really didn't have to do that. But I think it does raise a lot of questions about how you order. Putting things in order is a hugely powerful gesture, hugely powerful. So I think there is a lot that the author has a very powerful role. I think it's not an accident that really very few women until the late 19th and 20th centuries were prepared to really think of themselves as authors. The root of that word is obviously authority, and that's huge. Creating from the authority to create, and that's what it is. I remember, I don't know if any of you have read Richard Rodriguez's wonderful immigrant memoir, Hunger of Memory. And Richard was in my class, part of a series where we brought different writers. And so he had dedicated this book to his mother, and also said, my mother asked me not to write this. And he said, she said to me, why would you want to expose our family secrets to a bunch of gringos? And the first question one of my students asked might not have been the question somewhere that wasn't all observant Jewish students, but they were. And the first person to ask a question said, if your mother asked you not to do this, why did you do it? And I saw Richard kind of move towards that question briefly, to sort of deliver, this sophisticated truth, which is, it's mine if I say it is the material. And I've heard many people say that. And he paused and he realized that that was a much more profound question than he had been prepared to acknowledge at first. And he said it wasn't easy, and I knew this was probably had the potential, a lot in this book has the potential to hurt people. And I think that is true of writing memoir. It's going to be about other people as well as you, and other people are going to disagree about what they read. Did I answer your question? Okay. So, no, go ahead.
Does anybody here have questions for Joanne, since I've been hogging all the questions?
Yeah, well, I think it's so clear in your writing that rhythm is really important, and the musical cadence in your writing, and the poetic lyricism of your writing is
Can everyone
just-
hear Vesna? Okay, good.
So I have a
Andrew,
question
this.
about process. Thanks, Joanne. So I have a question about process. When you start out to write, it's sort of a double question. When you start out to write, what is the thing that you start with? Is it an image? Is it a sound? Is it an idea? And then, as you're writing that, what is the process of putting together the various parts of, the work? It strikes me, for example, in your writing that you'll be writing about something, and then suddenly we get birds coming in, or, a geological sort of strata. And it absolutely has to do with what you're writing. But what is your process of putting those things together?
I think I can answer more easily, but I'll move towards the second part of that question about where I start. And this has been a lesson that took me a long time to learn, especially as someone moving from academic writing, where you generally do start with an idea and a point you want to explore, and even a point you want to make. And one thing I slowly learned, and I tried to teach my students, was that the most powerful writing is most likely going to come from starting, or at least for me, and it was true for most of my students, with a scene, with an image, with something that one recalls, not even knowing necessarily what reason one recalls it, and being willing to, but one sense that there's something resonant there, something deep, without necessarily, and I know for myself it's often better not to know what it is about, and then to stay with that until that is revealed to me. And I mean, I don't think this is probably a lesson that most writers probably don't know, but I didn't. And I had this habit from before, because it's a really different kind of writing. And I think it's much more risky to write that way too. And when I taught undergraduates, I think that it was very hard for them to let go of the idea that they had, and I had to start with an idea, and to protect the subjects of theirs, especially since a lot of them were writing, as I have been, about family and parents, and that doing what I just said would bring them probably into the presence of things they might not want to know. And so I think that's, in a way, that's my method, is to start with these scenes, to start with images, and to see what reveals itself. And then I do think, for me, after that, you might have something to say about this as a poet, Anne, a lot starts to reveal itself. My degree is not in English, it's in American Studies, American Civilization, and so I'm happy to say that I think that has shown itself, if not in the prose, in the habit of thinking about things being related to one another. And that's what I'm always hoping for. That's what moves me often as a reader. So, I have to say, some of this seems like magic to me. It does. It still does. Often I think when I finished writing for the day, or even finished writing a piece of writing, I think, that's it. you know, especially if I love it. I think that was it. That was probably the last piece of really powerful prose I'm ever going to write. I just emptied. Yes, and so I think that's what I mean. I don't know that I think there does seem something magical about that. Do you have that sense also as a writer, Anne?
I also have it as a reader because I feel like I can tell. I review thousands and thousands and thousands of poems every year in my role as an editor of a poetry journal. And I feel like I can tell now the difference between poems that are written out of a sense of curiosity and discovery versus a poem that is written to prove something that it already knew from the first line. And I feel like that is true across any genre. So what you're saying about starting with something that is remembered and powerful, even if you don't really know the reasons why it continues to work on you. I can remember being a little girl sitting in the back of my father's Plymouth Valiant, which for some reason he decided to repaint with a paintbrush. And the floor had rusted through, and there was like a little hole in the floor about the size of a nickel. And I would just sit there and watch the street go by. Now, why that is important, and I can't name, presidents in order, all 50 states in the union, or any of those things that I was supposed to remember. No, but the reason why we remember things, that's enough of a reason to start to write. I'm so glad you've teed this up for me because Hive Center for the Book Arts, on Sunday, you had a little leaflet on your chair. This next Sunday, the 19th, from 1 to 2:30, Joanne will be teaching a workshop about doing this kind of writing, and you need not have any experience, just enthusiasm and a willingness to try. And the workshop is a whopping $25, but with the promo code EHC, or so Evanston History Center, you get $5 off just for being here. So thank you. Does anybody else have a question for Joanne? Yes. Would you like to?
No. The question I have, you came from an academic background where you wrote fact-driven. You had to research everything. When you switched to memoir, did you restrict yourself to what you remembered, or did you go to third parties to verify your facts?
That's also a really interesting question. I was kind of a sloppy academic, I just want to point that out. It wasn't as difficult a transition as it should have been. I think for me, the internet has been this astounding aid because so many things that, like sometimes people say to me, how do you remember about Tinker Toys? And that's how I'm sure everyone knows this, there's a highly developed website of toys of the 30s, toys of the 40s, and that's how I remember a lot of those things.
Where were Tinker Toys invented, Joanne?
But what about the more personal?
Oh.
The more personal facts.
Well, I guess to the extent that those are facts, I'm not giving you a hard time because, I have cousins, not on your side of the family, who were very, very upset about Hunger Artists when it came out. And pretty much never spoke to me again. Because they said that book, that when my father's sister said, I don't want my friends to pick up this book and think, X, Y, or Z. My grandfather was an alcoholic. Well, he was. You couldn't know him and not know that. But, so I think that, the truth about people, I pretty much I'm not someone who's ever kept a diary. I have definitely relied upon photographs and what I can see in them. And that, the first essay I wrote, which was about my father in books, begins with him standing with his father, who played baseball on, just a neighborhood team. And my father is standing next to him, and he obviously looks so miserable. And you could totally read from that what their relationship was. My father had no interest ever in playing baseball, and my grandfather was not going to treat him with respect until he did something athletic. So I did and I do rely a lot on family photographs, more than on, like researching that kind of, in the way I described about the Tinker Toys. Or Lincoln Logs, other local toys invented in this area. Yeah, that's an interesting question too. Other questions? Yeah.
Besides the retail landscape here, what are the biggest changes that you've noticed about Evanston when you came back? Like, did you notice with just, the people and the conversations that were taking place and so forth?
It's also a good question. I think that Evanston seems like a much more open place than it was in those years. It really does. I think that's probably probably the most powerful change that's taken place. And I look down and I see, a lot of places like the old 5 and 10 that was up on Main Street, and now is a guitar store. I just think that the interests of this area have really changed a lot. Though I think Dave's Down to Earth Rock Shop has been there for a
Just switched locations. But
Oh,
it's
across the street, right, right.
And Virag has been, do you remember
Oh,
Virag
yeah.
Jewelers when you were a kid?
Yes. More Dave's to Earth. I mean, my nephews always went there after, not Vera, the rock shop after school, and that's often where my sister picked them up. Do you all know that there's a museum in the basement there?
Yes.
It's a fantastic museum. It sort of distills the Field Museum down to like one room. Yeah, I think that's the thing that feels to me the most changed. And of course, maybe I didn't know what it was really like to be an adult here either. And so much change. I mean, my parents were divorced in and I was in 8th grade, and they were the first couple to be divorced on our block, and the first couple to be divorced in our family. That was such a horrible thing for my family, for my mother's family. My grandmother then took down the picture of my parents from the mantle and cut my father out with his scissors and put it back up. But within a year, like all of those women I told you about earlier who were my friends reached out to my mother in that first year. Within like a year or maybe 2, every one of those marriages had fallen apart.
Oh, wow.
So it was really not an exception any longer. That's not something that's necessarily good, obviously. But I think it became a place a lot less hidebound, a lot less predictable, a lot less rules following. That's my sense of things. I think that's an interesting question too. All of these are. Anyone else?
I have one final one.
Oh. I don't really seem to grasp the technology of this.
So Artemis 2 has just successfully left our planet and for some reason decided to return to it. Besides the questionable decision making that may or may not have been involved in that, do we need to leave home in order to understand it in a different way?
I think we do, actually. I'm not completely sure that it's worth the price of, paying what it costs this country to go into outer space. But, I think that in some ways, yes. I think we do need to leave home. And I would never, like I said earlier, I would never have pictured myself moving back to Evanston. And I think and that's one reason why I couldn't. I don't think I was really, it wasn't that I didn't, I couldn't. Never applied for jobs in this area. But I think I really wasn't ready to imagine the place in a different relationship to me or my parents. And I think that to some extent, I mean, there's probably people for whom that isn't necessary. You know, I'm not one of them. Yeah, I mean, I continued the whole time, my whole life I've regarded myself, and my whole life I've pretty much not lived in the Midwest. I've regarded myself as a Midwesterner, and I listened to all of my Middlebury students, you know, asking if it was possible to find an airline that flew out in the direction of Chicago. Explain that O'Hare is no longer considered a remote destination. But I think that, and I don't have any great, you know, overarching truths about generalizations to make about the Midwest. But I think for me, it has been necessary to have some distance. It has been necessary to have some distance in order to be emotionally present to this material. And so I guess that's would be my answer. I do hear like the people from the different NASA voyages saying that they're shocked to see what they see, even though I'm sure they've seen maps before, but they're just shocked. And I think that's a good example of that too. Thank you all. You have been just such a great partner. For any of you who have interest, not required, in buying any of these books, we have some in the bookstore. Is that what that is? Yeah. And I'd be happy to sign them. And I'm just going to say that I don't remember how much each of them costs, but I'm just going to say that they cost $15. And if you don't have exact change, I have a lot of $5 bills. So I don't feel like dealing with $16.95. But anyway, I've enjoyed this tremendously. Thank you so much for coming.
Such a beautiful conversation. Thank you so much, Joanne. Thank you, Anne, a wonderful moderator. Amazing questions. We appreciate partnering with Hive Book Arts. And that's what I forgot to say when I was doing my intro, was the workshop next week. Next Sunday, 1 to 2:30, $20 with the code EHC. You have the flyers. It's going to be amazing. And also, one other thing. When Joanne was speaking, I wanted to let you all know about another event which feels very parallel. It's not up on our website yet, but June 24th, 6:30, it's like a Tuesday, I think, we're going to be doing, we've been working with Evanston Latinos, so this is the second time that we're doing a talk called Nuestras Historias in Evanston, Our Stories in Evanston. It's going to be in English, and we're going to have several Evanston Latinos here talking about their stories moving here, but we have another Evanston-based writer. Her name is Paula Cofresi Silverstein. Her first book, I wrote down, Bomba, I wrote it down over there, Bomba Spirit, was about her journey from Puerto Rico to New York, and the second volume is just coming out, and it's about her journey from New York to Evanston, where she now lives. So there's going to be a few other people in conversation. We'll get the info up on our website and social media soon, but that's June 24th, so it might be a nice kind of continuation and different perspective on this conversation. You feel free to hang out for a little bit. We still have the refreshments, the books, and thank you again for just a lovely, lovely evening. So much to chew on. A very banal comment. I loved your thing about Brothers K. I also live in that area, and just as an example of how writers then make you think differently about something, the floor in there, I don't know if you go there, but every time I go, I'm like, oh, this place would be so much nicer if they would just like redo the floor. I know it's old and cool, but now every time I go in there, I'm gonna be like, this was the Evanshire Pharmacy, and Joanne came here to get her candy or whatever. So I'm never gonna think of that dirty old-fashioned floor at Brothers K the same way again. So thank you all for coming. I hope to see you again.